So welcome back to this special broadcast, which is being brought to you by Friends of the Earth Malta in collaboration with Lovin Malta. Our next MEP is Cyrus Engineer. So first of all, Cyrus, thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for having me.
So, Cyrus, as you know, this session is part of a project by Friends of the Earth Malta, which is focusing on solidarity across the EU, both within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also more broadly. The way we're going to do it is I'm going to start off with a couple of introductory questions myself, and then we'll move on to questions sent in by members of the public. So I'd like to start off by asking you about solidarity, how you view it. It's one of the Union's founding principles, but also something that it seems European citizens feel is lacking among Europeans. So first of all, would you agree that there's a lack of solidarity? Do you see it being enacted both on an institutional and between member states, and especially when it comes to the environmental and social perspective?
I think that, well, as we all know, solidarity is enshrined in the treaties in Article 80. However, we don't see it that much applied when it comes to things that are desperately needed at times. You mentioned the COVID-19 pandemic, for instance, and at first we saw the opposite of solidarity, with many countries becoming very much self-centered, closing their borders, trying to gain as many protective wear and protective things that were needed in hospitals and take them from each other. So we saw a lack of solidarity over there as well. We have seen this for quite a time now on migration, for instance, where we barely see any solidarity at all between member states. So yes, I'm not surprised that people feel that the European Union lacks solidarity, notwithstanding the fact that it is one of its most important values. That said, I think that when reality hits the fan, then the things change a bit and we do see solidarity. And I think that by the end of the pandemic, for instance, we have seen a European Union that came together for the first time in an area that it doesn't have any competence, in order to make sure that each and every member state has not only got vaccines accessible to it, but at the best price possible. So while we see a lack of solidarity within the European Union many a times, then when there is a very big need, and then when there's an emergency and it's time for all of us to unite together, then some solidarity comes through. And I hope that this experience of the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us a lot of things, amongst which is that there needs to be more cooperation and collaboration between the different member states on various areas, including in the health sector. Till today, the health sector is sole competence of the member state. We have seen that citizens all across Europe in different surveys, and also in our country, we're seeing that people want more cooperation between member states when it comes to health. And the proposal by the European Commission for a European Health Union will undoubtedly move towards that. And I hope that such a health union will have as one of its main pillars patients' needs and access to affordable medicines, which at the end of the day is something very important. We suffer a lot from it in Malta because we're a very small member state, and therefore pharmaceutical companies might not find us attractive to sell us their products, their medicines. But at the end of the day, should we have the European Commission buying pharmaceutical products to all member states, that assures that everyone has access to all medicines and at the best price possible.
You mentioned how kind of even with the COVID pandemic, it took a while for kind of the EU to start acting as one, and you also mentioned migration, where kind of there are different interests. Do you think that this speaks to a problem maybe that's more fundamental about the EU and how it works? Like, can we expect 27 countries with different interests to work together, or is it realistic?
It is realistic, and we can work together on those areas that are of common interest to us all. Obviously, there is a discussion going on whether how to have the best functioning of the European Union, and at the moment, with the conference on the future of Europe, I think that it is very good time to discuss the way we function, because as we see, there are different institutions in the European Union, as I'm sure everyone is aware, but we might not know exactly how the different institutions work. That said, as people see many a times in the European Parliament, we have a system where a simple majority decides. In the Council, it is a totally different story. So where you get the 27 different member states, their ministers, or the Prime Minister of every single member state, to decide on issues that are of interest to the whole Union. So over there, with the latest big enlargement of the European Union in 2004, when Malta joined, we have seen that it has become much more difficult for 27 member states to agree on the same thing. So many a times we end up with the lowest common denominator on most issues that require unanimity. And many a times people expect something much better, and people deserve something much better than the lowest common denominator between 27 member states. Because let's take migration, for instance, as an example. We have a reality in which a few member states are taking all the burden of, first of all, saving migrants at sea, which is the most important thing, because at the end of the day, nothing matters more than life. So we need to make sure that people who are at the risk of drowning are saved in our seas. But then, even because of the Dublin regulation, for instance, and the way that the system is within Council, we find no relocation. So you get a lot of asylum seekers in Malta, in Greece, in Spain, in Italy. Then these are processed. Sometimes people are given refugee status. Sometimes they do not qualify for that status and are given subsidiary protection or different other forms of protection, or are simply denied asylum and are therefore considered as people that need to return back to their countries. But whatever the situation, whatever the circumstance, reality is that it is all the responsibility of that member state to which those asylum seekers arrived in the first place. So whether they are given refugee status, then they cannot move out to another European country. If they're given any type of other protection, they are bound to stay in that one member state. If they do not qualify for asylum and need to be sent back to their country of origin, it is that member state that ends up having to find the ways and means to return those people back to their country. So yes, when it comes to migration, for instance, there is lack of solidarity, which is unacceptable. And as a European Parliament, we have spoken strongly on this, that solidarity is a must. There is a majority in Parliament for solidarity, for relocation. And I was honored during the past weeks to be given the honor to take on the task as negotiator for my political group, the Socialists and Democrats, on a number of migration files. And our position as Socialists and Democrats, and it wasn't easy to convince everyone, but even in a few weeks, we're getting towards the point where the Socialists are agreeing with us that we should not move on with further discussions when it comes to migration, to discuss, for instance, the new Migration and Asylum Pact, unless there is the understanding that the burden will be shared between all 27 member states. And I'm happy that we are in line with each other, both myself and my political group, which gives me more strength to negotiate with the other political groupings in order to at least achieve a minimum level of solidarity before we can continue discussing other things, because everything else is becoming irrelevant unless we address the elephant in the room, basically.
But I mean, as you said, Council can hold things up. As you said, unanimity is required. Would you say you're in favour for that changing, or that it cuts both ways?
Just one thing, unanimity is not required when it comes to migration. When it comes to migration, it is qualified majority voting and not unanimity. The problem is that unanimity is always used because the European Commission has given up on trying to find an agreement between the 27 member states. The European Commission knows that there are some Eastern member states, for instance, Hungary, amongst others, that are not only reluctant, but are totally opposed as to having any migrants within their territory. And unfortunately, we are seeing a situation where the European Commission has given up. And that is unacceptable. The European Commission knows what the treaties say. The European Commission knows what should be done and how decisions should be taken in this regard in Council. And we expect nothing but the European Commission to act according to the treaties and see that even in Council, such decisions with regards to migration are taken with a qualified majority vote. That said, even with a qualified majority vote, there might not be a majority for burden sharing, let's say, because the Eastern Bloc is quite strong. There are quite a good number of member states representing a very good number of citizens, and therefore they can block any agreement that can be made. However, I cannot accept that the European Commission simply gives up. I think it is the European Commission as the guarantor of treaties that should take action in this regard and make sure that in this particular file on these particular topics, the treaties are respected.
While we're on human rights, because you recently voted in favor of a report in the European Parliament, which amongst other things, it was a report about sexual health and reproductive rights. But among other things, it sort of says that access to abortion should be, or is rather a human right. Now, we know that the subject is a sensitive one in Malta, and there are in fact safeguards against us having abortion imposed on us, basically. But I was curious, where would you like to see Malta go when it comes to sexual health and reproductive rights in the future?
In fact, none of the things that we have voted on will be ever imposed on Malta or any other member state, because it is member state competence to decide on this. However, this was a matter of principle, a matter of the European Parliament standing and giving its voice and making its voice heard on a number of important sexual and reproductive health and rights. Now, the whole report is a very interesting one. It is science-based, and I would really love to have everyone read it, because while abortion is a part of this whole report, it is such an extremely good report that it is such a pity that in our country, Malta, the only discussion happening on this report is on safe access to abortion and not discussing all the other important things with regards to sexual health. I think that if you ask me where do I see us or where do I want to see us in a few years' time, my biggest wish is to have a better sexual health education policy in our country, because this is what this report does. This report is based on sexual education. It is the umbrella topic all across the report, and it is so important to have sexual health education in our schools based on science and away from dogma, because we are used to hearing, and it is an important view, obviously, the views of different religions and churches and denominations. That's all important, and it's important to know what these religions say. But at the end of the day, in our schools, we also need to have science-based sexual health education, and this is what the whole report is about. And that is what I would like to see: sexual health education that is given to all our young people in our country, so that in their experiences, then they could make their decisions based on facts and not on fairy tales or whatever. It is important to see what the facts are on these issues and make sure that in every young person's experience, everyone passes through these stages in our lives. It is so important to have all the information needed to be able to make and take the right decisions at the right time when you need to actually take them. And apart from that, then this report speaks of many other important. For instance, I got this email, and this is why I always state that, first of all, let's not judge people for their decisions. Let's listen to what their experiences are and put ourselves in their shoes, because it's very difficult for many to understand what a particular person or couple would be going through, because it is not the experience that we would be facing. So we would not know the reality surrounding certain people. And I received many emails with regards to this report, and many people, I was surprised, many people asking me to vote in favor, many others asking me to vote against. But one of the most emails that really struck me was by a woman who told me that herself and her husband have spent 25,000 euros trying to have a child. So they've gone through IVF procedures in our country. They are trying to do some IVF procedures abroad. And this report, which many are describing as the report that wants to kill babies, is the report that she asked me, she pleaded for me to vote in favor of, because through this report, she is seeing that the IVF treatment that she so much needs, that they so much need as a couple, is one of those that is discussed in this report. And this report says that that kind of treatment should be available in all 27 member states, should be accessible to all EU citizens, and it should be affordable to all EU citizens. So when we put ourselves in these people's shoes, then we can really understand why these issues are so important to those who are suffering. For many of us, as happened with divorce 10 years ago, for many of us, divorce meant nothing because we did not need divorce. For many of us, marriage equality meant nothing because people could get married and had no problems with that. But it is for those that are suffering and for those who are experiencing the realities that they are experiencing that these are important. And I will never shy away from deciding and voting according to my conscience on issues of civil liberties that at the end of the day will give better options and a better life to so many people who are unfortunately suffering as we speak.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, it's the solidarity we're saying, I mean, the EU is founded on. I'm going to shift now onto a bit of an economic question, COVID. As we know, the pandemic has ravaged our economies, and we're now looking to rebuild. To those who maybe are frustrated with kind of the way the economic system works, with inequality, environmental degradation as a result, what should we be aiming for when it comes to the COVID recovery? And this is just going to be kind of back to where we were, more of the same, or do you think that the EU has it in it to kind of bring about a bit of a paradigm shift and shift something more sustainable in the future?
When it comes to what we are preaching and voting on paper, definitely it's not the return of business as usual. As a European Union, we have come up with a fund, the RRF, the Recovery and Resilience Fund, which has nearly 700 billion euros in it, some 672 billion, if I'm not mistaken, worth of funds that will go towards the different European economies in the different member states in order to revive our economies. However, one of the conditions that we have made as members of the European Parliament, and it is also the Commission's proposal, to be fair, and I believe that Council is in line as well, that any recovery should be a just recovery and a green recovery in line with the European Green Deal. So it is important that we do not go back to what we were used to, but to have a new normal that we're hearing so much about. Now, I know it is not easy because at this moment in time, we're all currently experiencing the removal of a number of restrictions, and undoubtedly, after having a lot of restrictions, the first thing that anyone would want to do is go back to normal, doing the things that we used to do before. However, in reality, I believe that we can do all those things in a new learned way. I hope that the pandemic has not been a missed opportunity to learn. I mean, each and every one of us, I think, had the chance now to learn, to stop and think on a number of things that we might have taken for granted before, but during this time we learned to appreciate them more. Whether it is nature and spending more time in nature, since we have to be socially distant, so we needed to find our own space, and which was, at the end of the day, we learned how good that was for our mental health, because whilst a good environment is undoubtedly important for our physical health, because of the air we breathe, it is also so important for our mental health. I personally, during this past year and a half, I learned how important it is for myself, at least, to go out in nature and spend some time among, over here in Brussels. We have amazing forests where you can go and calm yourself from the daily stresses of life. In Malta, we might not have any forests, but we have some small parks, but then we have amazing walks in, like, the Maestral Park, for instance, next to the sea. We have our seas, we have our small islands. So nature can give us so much, and it is so important that in the recovery that we're going to have, the economic recovery, we all of us, we can do small things in order to have a better future. And these small things, many a times, lead to a huge impact. So let's not shy away from trying things that we might not have tried before, even in our daily work. Now I've seen that some of us can work from home, for instance. I'm not saying that it is 100% healthy, because I myself do not like working from home all the time, but I think we can all find a balance. And that balance, at the end of the day, is very good for our environment.
Okay, so the next one is a question asking about mobility in Malta. The question is, when are you going to push for more sustainable mobility in Malta? What would you say to that?
Well, it's something that I push for. It is something that I really don't like about Malta. I think Malta is a fantastic place. It's a beautiful island, a beautiful country. We do things successfully many a times. However, when it comes to the way we commute, each and every one of us, so I'm putting the blame on myself as well. Many a times we find it so easy to use our private vehicles, our cars, to move around the island. And recently, I think it was one of those things that came with the pandemic, and me thinking a bit more on what could be done in order for us to change. I tried myself to change the way that I travel, the way I commute within Malta, because the interesting thing is that, I've lived in Brussels for about 10 years now, coming and going, even more, 12 probably. I used to study here. I worked at the Maltese Parliament representation. Now I'm a member of the European Parliament. And in Brussels, I tend to use a bicycle very regularly. I don't say that I use it all the time, but many of my trips here in Brussels are done using a bicycle. And I always ask myself, but why don't I try this in Malta? Now, the problem with Malta is that our infrastructure is not very well equipped for bicycles. Sorry?
Shouldn't it be?
I think it should be. But a bigger problem is that people who drive cars are not used to having cyclists in the streets as well. So if you drive a car here in Brussels, you are used to having a big number, a huge number of bicycles in the streets at the same time, and everything is integrated together, and there are no major problems. Everyone is used to that, so you know what to do when a bicycle is approaching, etc., etc. And that is something that we don't have in Malta. So apart from infrastructure, then there also needs to be more education on how to share the same road with other means of transport. So that is something important. I have also tried recently in Malta the electric scooters. So nowadays, when I'm in, so I live in Slima, and most of the things I do are held in that region: St. Julian, Slima, Gżira, Msida, and Valletta, more or less. So I have come to realize that I barely need my car in that region. I would need it then if I have a meeting in Jar, for instance, or a meeting in Rabat. But within the region where I live, it's very easy to commute using other means of transport, and I'm trying to do that as much as possible, and I'm really enjoying it. One of the things that I think we need to change in Malta to make this easier is what there is in continental Europe. I'm afraid that in Malta we have the British system when it comes to our roads, infrastructure, and the way we use our roads. In continental Europe, you realize that the way that the streets are built, even the way where pedestrian crossings are, and the way everything is, it is done with one thing in mind, that the pedestrian is first, the cyclist is second, public transport is third, and then there's the right of the private vehicle. But that is the priority. Unfortunately, I think in our case, those priorities are inverted, having first the private vehicle as the main means of transport, and which is given all priority in our streets, and then the rest comes afterwards. For instance, over here in Brussels, if I am walking from point A to point B, I barely have to stop, because even when I'm crossing the street, I've got the right to cross first, and you find a pedestrian crossing in every single corner and in all corners. So I think we need a rethink of our infrastructure, and we need to have a Brexit, I guess, from our roads.
Well, many would agree with you. Let's hope that we can get there. I'm going to move on to some other questions because we have quite a few, and we don't have all the time in the world. So this is about, again, it's about the environment. The question is, what sustainable community-driven practices do you think should be enshrined into legislation in order to protect and respect the environment in Malta, especially when it comes to air and noise pollution?
So let me start with one thing that I think is very important. We were discussing the COVID pandemic earlier on and the impact that this has had on our lives. And now I want to look at it from the other perspective, the huge sacrifices that we have all made in order to safeguard people's lives. And that was something very important. We saw solidarity in action in all member states, and even in Malta, where we closed shops, we closed restaurants, we closed gyms. Over here in Brussels, there were curfews, there was a lockdown in order to protect each other. So we had a lot of things being done all across the world in solidarity with many times with people who are more vulnerable in order to protect them. So we did that, and that was fantastic. However, many of us don't realize that, for instance, in Malta, more than 500 people die every year because of air pollution, because of the emissions that we have in our streets, mainly coming from our transport. And this is leading to more than 500 people per year losing their lives because of this. So what we did for COVID was fantastic, but shouldn't we do something in order to make sure that these 500 people, so that we protect these 500 people every year? Because, and this was one of the main things why I decided to try and, as much as possible, use alternative means of transport, both in Malta and even here in Brussels, because we've done so much to protect people with COVID. Why aren't we doing the same to protect people who are dying because of the air that we breathe? And I think when one sees the numbers, one realizes how important it is to do something. So whether it is enshrined or not, I mean, I won't go to that discussion as such, But I think each and every one of us can show solidarity with others, and it could be with ourselves at the end of the day, because we are the ones breathing the air that we're creating at the end of the day. So it's very important that, as I said at some point, the small things that we do can have a big impact. If all of us, if we all do these small things, it would, at the end of the day, have a very big impact on our environment.
That's a very interesting point. So I have the last couple of questions. So well, actually, two are pretty much the same, so I'm going to combine them into one. The question is, why are the majority of supermarkets in Malta still packing many of their products in single-use containers? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think it's something we can speak of the law, and the law has banned single-use plastics, but not all single-use plastics, because there are some plastics that are thinner than a certain amount that I do not know by heart, that are still acceptable, etc. But rather than having legislation, this goes back also to the other issue of transport, etc. We could do our part in this. Yes, some supermarkets are still giving their food in single-use containers. Firstly, we can, as consumers of that supermarket, not accept that. We must make our voice heard that that is unacceptable to us, and that we do not want to be served that food in single-use plastic containers. Apart from that, apart from making a stand, because many times we tend to complain on things, but then not take bold stands and tell the supermarket that we are not happy with the service that we are given. But apart from that, then we can also take our own containers. So, you know, everything starts from us. Let's not expect the state to do everything for us. We should be the ones that take up the initiative, go to the supermarket, take our own containers with us, and ask for the food to be placed in our own containers. It's not a difficult thing to do. And who knows, maybe if there are intelligent supermarkets, they would do things in a smart way, and maybe even offer discounts to those who are using their own reusable containers. That would probably lead to many of us taking our reusable containers instead, and also basically make the product even more profitable for the supermarket itself.
Let's hope one of them is watching us. Maybe they can take on this suggestion.
Let's contact them ourselves.
Fair enough. Okay, so our last question. It's a bit of a hypothetical one, but so what is your utopian vision of Malta in a post-pandemic renaissance, and how will you mobilize? Would you mobilize each neighborhood's willingness to actively claim and own this vision as their own?
It's a very difficult question, because utopias, at the end of the day, are utopias. That said, I would love us to live in a modern society, a society that is. I think we need a bit of a paradigm shift in the way we do things. First of all, because this modernity that I'm speaking about, it could go on all sectors of life. So we could speak on the environment, for instance, and discuss on different ways by which we could be smarter in the way we build, for instance, smarter in the way we have our road infrastructure system, smarter in the way we introduce green areas within our urban cores, which is something that unfortunately in Malta has failed all throughout. Then it could be a cultural renaissance, which I think is needed, where we appreciate more our cultural heritage, which is important, but thinking. I think what lacks in our culture sector is thought provocation, and I think that is very important in a modern society, which then would lead to a change in mentality when it comes to civil rights, that everyone should be able to have the right to bodily integrity, for instance, and that people can make their choices for themselves, which then leads, and this can keep on leading onto different areas. But at the end of the day, this modernist approach in which we change the way that we think, I think, and that is the most important thing. And let's not remain captives of the fact that we are a small island and keep on thinking through a small island mentality. I think that we can do huge things, not only at a European level, but also globally, but we need to break that barrier. There's like a glass ceiling, like there's a glass ceiling for women when it comes to employment. I think there's a glass ceiling for us Maltese, and we need to break that. And that glass ceiling is being put by ourselves in our mind, in our frame of mind, and the way we do and think of things. And I think that one of the most, I'm just remembering it, and I'll finish off by this, one of the most important things that we're doing at the European level is the new European Bauhaus. I don't know if you have heard about it. The Bauhaus movement was a movement in the 1920s, primarily, that started in Germany, that brought together architecture, so building in a sustainable way and an inclusive way. So it was creating living spaces that are good for the environment, but also good for different people to live together in an area where there's inclusion and there's art and culture. And I think that is what we should aim for. And I'm really glad that the European Commission has just launched this initiative, the new European Bauhaus, for all 27 member states, where there will be money being given to a number of projects that would ultimately, hopefully, lead to other people investing in buildings that are more green and more inclusive and artistic in themselves. That is the Maltese utopia I dream of.
Well, we can only hope. So thank you very, very much again for agreeing to be with us. We're going to cut off to a quick break, and then we'll be right back.